Good morning, Richard.
Good morning, Sharon.
Um, when our Mahoi group met this week, you presented a paper reflecting on liberation theology, and I wonder if you could tell us a bit more about that by way of introduction.
Sure. It was called and is called The Impact of Liberation Theologies on the Church by someone I hadn't heard of, Armin Roda, who I've found is a Brazilian theologian. It was published in 2008, so it's hardly modern or contemporary, but the theme attracted me, having studied liberation theology to a certain extent in the 1980s. I have wondered what's happened to that movement. But more than that, he focuses on the theologian Gustavo Gutierrez, and particularly what drew me was just one phrase that I've sometimes seen, and I find it almost haunting, the phrase that theology arises at sundown.
Mm.
Theology arises at sundown. And so the article is a critique of liberation theology, but in the critique is an exposition of what Gutierrez, some of the main patterns and themes in his thought. Gutierrez got that phrase. It's often said he got it directly from Hegel, the philosopher Hegel, which is not quite true. At least it's a paraphrase. And on the post, I'll put what that actual quote from Hegel was. But Gutierrez is saying that whereas Western theology or European-based, North American-based theology has usually started from the Bible and from theological tradition, dogmatic tradition, and then sought to apply that theology to everyday life. The liberation theologies, and Gutierrez was one of these, really turned that around and said that what was most important was the context in which people are placed, in which Christians live out their life, and the commitments that they have. And in liberation theology terms, the commitment of the theologian is primarily to the poor. And the reality of the poor is quite stark, of course, through those South and Central American countries. And I remember Gutierrez once said, I think it was Gutierrez said, in Western theology, they were mainly concerned with the death of God in the 1970s and 80s. That was a theme, the death of God. Whereas liberation theologies were mainly concerned with the death of the theologian, because they were being hounded and persecuted and expelled in some cases. So it was liberation theology arose in and from very concrete circumstances in which there was a tremendous gap between the poor and the rich, and the church was advocating a stance on behalf of the poor, or at least the liberation theology part of the church was. The institutional church often had other voices and other things to say that were quite condemning of liberation theology. But just to go back to Gutierrez and that phrase, theology begins or arises at nightfall, it was Gutierrez's way of summarizing the view that theology is reflection on praxis, so that you live the life for the poor, an activist, advocate, participatory type of life living, however that's played out in the setting in society. You may use, although it wasn't essential to liberation theology, but you may use Marxist analysis to begin to understand and articulate those social circumstances. And then at the end of the day, you look back on the day of action and you try to understand it in traditionally theological terms. You might ask, where did we see grace? Or where did we feel that providence was, or the work of the Holy Spirit was evident amongst us, those kinds of questions.
Mm.
And yes, I think for our theologizing in Aotearoa, New Zealand, at least liberation theology taught us to take the context seriously and to ask what are the social commitments that we have and the political commitments that we have that are already shaping our theology, whether we know it or not, and how can we reflect critically on our stance within society in order to do better God's work. I'll stop there, Sharon.
Very good. Thank you, Richard.
Thank you. So, well, post the article, and I hope it might get some readership.
Yes.
Thanks, Sharon.
Well done. Okay. Have a good weekend.